How to identify primary and secondary sources. As present or future history teachers, part of our job is to teach our students how to become well-informed citizens. In order for them to accomplish this incredible task, we must teach them how to find information on their own and to form their own opinions in their own words. In other words, we must teach students how to conduct research. Arguably, the first step in teaching students how to research a topic is discussing the difference between primary and secondary sources. Now, you might be asking yourself, what are primary and secondary sources? A primary source is a source which is taken directly from the original time period studied. It is generally considered to be a pure, uninterpreted artifact from the particular time period. Primary sources include, but are not limited to, newspapers, artifacts, weapons and clothing from a particular era, letters or maybe even emails, artwork and sculptures, and even photography. The important thing to note is that it is up to the researcher to determine the relevance and importance of each primary source. But what about secondary sources? Well, secondary sources are sources which include someone else's interpretation of other primary sources. Secondary sources generally include websites, textbooks, and scholarly journals. Here, why don't we look at an example so that maybe these distinctions will become just a little bit clearer. So, for example, let's take a look at jousting. Let's say you want to find out some more information on jousting. So, here's a handful of places that you might take a look at. Let's start with primary sources. One primary source that you might use is artwork taken from the time, which depicts jousting from the time period. Another amazing primary source would be to look at some of the remaining medieval armor that we have, particularly the ones which are designed specifically for jousting, to give you an idea for what kind of armor, what kind of tactics were used during medieval jousting. And if you look hard enough, you might even find training manuals on jousting from the time period. However, you might not have enough information to interpret those primary sources, so a handful of secondary sources will definitely help you out. One secondary source you can go to is a nice little jousting reenactment, where you can look at other people's interpretation of how jousting would have actually been performed. Another possible secondary source is to look up textbooks on jousting, and to look up some very popular books that are written by the authors of today. And don't forget that internet. It'll save you in a pinch. Generally speaking, when conducting research, it's important to focus on primary sources. Being the genuine article, there is no bias there besides your own. However, you might not have all the information needed to interpret the source correctly. Secondary sources can be exceptionally helpful. The main benefit of it being that you have other people's knowledge and experience to help fill in the gaps of your own misunderstandings. However, you need to keep in mind that the author's point of view is limited to his or her own understanding and is often very biased.